you hear the amount of hesitation in the polity and supporters of the government when the Nupur Sharma episode happened, that we have to somehow maintain good relations with the Islamic countries, so we need to take certain measures. They are saying we cannot protect because somebody else
thinks that
in a certain way. What we expect is the reverse. This nation stands for these values, and if somebody like Afghanistan or Bangladesh is persecuting people, they should be wary of it.
Yeah.
We have this neighbor and we are not supposed to be taking this kind of liberty.
Yes, so they will not be allowed to take that. If by chance they are taken over, they take over, they must be fearful.
Exactly.
They must be fearful that Bharat will invade.
Because you would exercise power, not merely have power.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a military invasion at all, but still. But most of the times that fear acts. The point here is,
basically,
if you are seen as the protector,
they will not be able to take over because they'll be fearful.
Exactly. All this is possible only when we have a righteous state, where the ethos are, or the rules of the state are, to abide by the Dharma. Where the state is not infinite, it is finite, yet effective.
Namaste, welcome to another edition of Sangam Talks. Today I have with me Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavalli, who's been one of the few people who've deeply influenced me in my evolution as a Dharmika, if you like. Self-congratulatory note है अपने आप को धार्मिका बुलाना, मगर उस एवोल्यूशन में शंकर की बहुत बड़ी कंट्रीब्यूशन रही है. तो आज हम चर्चा करने वाले हैं धर्म राज्य पे. दिस इज़ अ प्रोजेक्ट, it's Shankar's pet project on building a theory for a nation state, for an Indian nation state, and extend it to any dharmic state in the world. The current constitution is totally an Abrahamic worldview. It is a copy-paste from many different constitutions of the world, starting say with the French Revolution, the adoption of the constitution in US, Irish constitution, for example. The word denomination comes from the Irish constitution. There are talks between Anand, Prasad and me on Sangam Talks. Have a look on why this constitution is completely a colonial document. So what Shankar is doing is building a theory of a nation state. तो आज हमारी चर्चा जो है is on the principles of why is it required and on what principles should such a nation state build its documentation, its theory, its institutions, its policies, and so on and so forth. Shankar, welcome. Maybe we can start. I'll ask the question actually to your slide. Why is this required? So take us through this.
So to start with, the current Indian state as it formed the Indian Union in 1947 and then became a republic in 1950. Whatever constitution came into picture, with whatever design it had, there were certain intent at that time, certain compulsions, whatever be the reason. The current state design doesn't really align with the ethos of the country.
Why do you say that?
We can debate on whether the intent is there or not, and to some extent it reflects also, let us say, the judiciary, the more army slogans, Satyameva Jayate, all these things. There is a lot of symbolism, there is visible intent, but at the same time, exactly how is the design of the state, what is the worldview adopted by the state? Neither of these really reflects an Indian worldview.
So you're saying Satyamev Jayate and things like that is all basically tokenism, which may reflect an intent of delivering right justice and truth will prevail and so on and so forth. But the actuality of this is that I don't know how many million cases we have pending, and for the experience of a common man to get justice is completely broken.
Exactly.
It's the lived reality.
That is the lived reality, and that is also because the lived reality is shaped towards this outcome because of the existing institution design. The design of the judiciary, whether the design of the Indian state itself. Judiciary, people can directly relate to right from the Black Court. It is visible as a remnant of a colonial design. It's not just that they adopt English, it's not just that they wear black coats, it's also that the very adversarial system is not our system. Exactly what is the objective of how the courts are functioning? Justice, yes, but how? End of the day, what is the design by which that is achieved? That institution design still remains a Western design.
Is a Western design, which is of centralization of delivery of justice as an example.
Is one way to look at it.
Instead of community-based local justice delivery, for example, khap panchayats.
That intent, again, the decentralization itself is not the main problem, because the Supreme Court by design is not meant to actually address cases to deliver justice. Only things that get escalated beyond a point.
But even in the civil courts, it's still centralized. There is nothing which is of the community.
Run by the state.
Run by the state, yes. Okay.
It is decentralized, federalized, but still run by the state. So the community participation in justice delivery is not there, obviously.
And that is a desired.
That was our system. Don't desire is.
That was our system.
But the principle of how justice is delivered, the adversarial view towards how justice is supposed to be achieved. If the idea that two entities pull the tug from two sides and then we are more likely to arrive at some balance, that's not an exercise in truth finding, it is an exercise in arriving at a decent bargain. In principle. I mean, just one example, but we can probably will need to do a thorough session or research on that itself, but these are all examples that are directly visible to us. Is there a point in Nyayavada? Because the Nyaya Adhikari is supposed to ascertain Nyaya. Why is he supposed to argue for Nyaya? So, it's not just one or two things, we can expand on examples, but essentially this institution design remains an imported design, that far everybody agrees. And it's also, to be fair, a fact that people have adopted because they found this to be survival fit. They did not find traditional models to be survival fit. And this also has some historic precedent and support from reality. Okay. Most of the countries that have decolonized in 20th century or have tried to modernize in 20th century have adopted the Western models to different degrees so that they are survival fit. And those who have adopted have actually succeeded in progressing. China, India also to a good extent. The trajectory is once they have enough strength, they start asserting their nativity, because eventually that self-discovery, that craving comes to assert themselves. Then the craving for a new model comes, their own model comes. So whatever be the reason, we basically, it's a given that the current model is not a native model. The question is whether it serves our purpose. Beyond a point, it doesn't. Not just beyond a point, all the integration motifs that we traditionally had, the Desha, Sampradaya, Kula, all these have become disintegration motifs in the current design. So basically this design is set to divide and not to integrate. And that's not because people are bad. People are the same all the time. That's because the design is bad. So now can the nation act? This is also another rhetoric that keeps coming. The system is like that, but what are you doing in your capacity? Now, if people have to act to fix the system, what kind of system it is? Again, it comes back to how well-meaning the system is at this point of time and what can be done to fix that. Because the context is the design of the system. Context is not exactly individual activism. And the nation should not have to rise in spite of the state. The nation should not have to come up in spite of the state. The state should be the main enabler for the nation to come up.
Okay. So despite all the nonsense of the state, the nation is struggling to come up.
And it has been coming up.
It has been coming up. So it should be more conducive. The coming up of the nation should be more conducive to...
State should be conducive.
Should be more conducive to rise of the nation. Yes. Sure.
So, which is why after nearly 8 decades, the collective energies, where are they spent as on date? They are spent on the utility level problem solving, still a welfareism, all these things. Where are we really in the higher end of technology or military or any major field where we can be of reckoning? Yes, still in good books of many countries, those are all fine. And that is because a lot of good work is done, helping other countries, all these things. And a lot of utility is also being served. But that's not exactly how you establish a major power.
You're do-gooders with vaccine policy and whatever else, but we are way behind. This is established that we are way behind either in technology for warfare or AI or any meaningful world-cutting technology. We are laggards at best, right? Just because now China comes up with DeepSeek, so we will have our Indian AI, which is okay, good, very good. At least we are waking up as reactionaries, but there is no proactive. That shows up in our education, in our patents, everywhere we are laggards. Absolutely. So that's completely established. So you're saying we are laggards in all this because the present state is not conducive to the rise and to knowledge building and
Yes,
becoming a hard
the prioritization is like that, which is why the results are like this.
What do you mean?
The prioritization is on welfareism from the top. The state prioritizes that because the state's goals have been defined that way, right from the preamble. So it's not exactly that the dispensation is to be blamed, the design is like that.
You mean socialism, secularism, equality, all those doctrines that are inserted into the constitution. Okay, so that is design.
So from here, I mean, to argue that the current system is inept or suitable, not suitable, that's all the debating part. But largely, it's a given that it's a modern system, Western system that has been adopted. So, what exactly is the future as part of a natural trajectory of a rising nation? It may be some things may be doable, some things may be farther, but eventually a native model has to be emerging.
So if we have to have a India, a Bharat in 2047, then what does that nation state look like? Is it only a Vikshit Bharat, which is part of the committee of developed nations with whatever 10,500 or 13,500, whatever is the per capita, income parameter, that has become the only parameter of this government, which is wonderful. You have an economic parameter, but what we are discussing here is that what else does the nation state need to have? In my conversations before this talk, said that only Artha is the parameter that the state has taken. But Shankar even challenged that this is not Artha.
Yeah, because Artha is essentially the means to fulfill Dharma. So, accumulation of means in the right process for the right purposes is Artha. Money making exactly is not.
Not Artha.
It's not just very small part. The means of accumulation also become questionable.
Correct. So here the means of accumulation of wealth is also in question, as one person I was sharing with you that told me last week that the state actually forces a wealth creator to become a corrupt wealth creator right now, to create negative karma for himself instead of a state which promotes dharmic behaviors.
Exactly. Basically, to get anywhere, first we need to have a dream. Incremental progress is all good, but without a dream, where is our direction? Where are we headed? Unless that is clear to the nation and it is made clear to the nation from the leadership, the direction is always going to be
Haphazard,
changing. More importantly, it lacks probity.
Okay.
Therefore, we have to posit a dream and ensure that any policy strategy that is made is in that direction. And that doesn't have to be secret at all.
Correct. Very good.
To have a dreamland your nation to be a dreamland is a natural dream for anybody. It doesn't have to be any secret anywhere in that.
Yes.
There could be strategic details that could be confidential or to the discretion of the leadership.
Sure.
But the dream of where we have to get has to be absolutely clear, which is where we want to.
A Bharata of a future.
Bharata of a future.
Tell us more. Let's go
Which
point by point.
Which has to be ideally beyond what a superpower today conventionally means, which is basically a political and military power which has the ability to establish hegemony and to maintain it. I have to look beyond that because that is a source for conflict by nature.
Okay.
We seek happiness, knowledge, harmony, aesthetics, spirituality. So this has to be an abode of knowledge, the future Bharata, and prosperity, and naturally power, because without power none of this is possible.
I was seeing a video which was retweeted by Elon Musk this morning, and we'll try and insert it in the video. It talked about how in 1948 somebody called Kennan wrote a paper. The paper was called something like Political Warfare. And we'll find the paper and insert it at the bottom in the description with a link to this video. And so that became state doctrine, out of which CIA and others came with unlimited power to find conflict areas in every country around the world, exploit them to maintain American hegemony. So you're spot on when you say superpower is right now the idea is hegemonic, which can cause upheavals, conflict, put your people who are in your interest in power, all which what is going on in Bangladesh, what we call deep state, came out of that paper in 1948 to maintain political hegemony. So spot on, superpower is like that.
Even Ukraine and US itself accepts it.
Ukraine, yes, absolutely. Is that what Bharat wants to be when we say superpower? Perhaps not. So what should be a definition of a or beyond superpower?
Is an abode of beauty and happiness. Now, where eventually everything comes down to how the man is enabled and what is he enabled to do. So, where every being is enabled for the highest knowledge and highest happiness would be the land of least conflict and greatest harmony. So, where people can live harmoniously, non-acrimoniously. Now, where our current institutional structure, as we just discussed, is it pits for disintegration, it does not pit for integration.
Why do you say that?
While it unifies at an Indian Union level with a common military and common polity, all the natural identities have been disincentivized for harmony. Region to region there is a conflict, group to group there is a conflict, tradition to tradition there is a conflict, thought process to thought process there is a conflict. And this is because the Indian Union has pit them that way. The carving out of geopolitical unions, the units, is not exactly aligned with the geocultural units, which are the deshas.
So tell me more. What do you mean? How? Why? What deshas? I know we've spoken about it, but for repetition's sake.
The bigger subcontinent had 56 deshas, which are the geocultural units. Each region has its own unique language, culture, ways of life, dressing, all these things. Now, whatever this unity and diversity that people used to drum about is exactly the diversity of these deshas. This traditionally we had an orthogonality of institutions between the Rajyas and the Deshas. So you could have a kingdom that spread multiple Deshas, in which case every Desha still was administered according to the local practices, languages and customs. There was no one political entity imposing its own language or culture on any other Desha. Marathas did not enforce their language across the country when they ruled the country almost atak to katok. Vijayanagara did not do that. Gajapati did not do that. Nobody did that. Because it was very clearly understood that the geopolitical is a temporary organizing unit, whereas the geocultural is an inherited permanent unit. This difference is entirely not taken into cognizance by the Indian Union.
Are these geopolitical deshas, the geocultural units, deshas, do they still exist in your view?
They exist always.
Always. Right now also?
Yes.
For example, Kalinga or Mundel, or would these be deshas? What are the deshas?
Some are the Rajas. So the list is there, 56, but take example of this Vidarbha or Konkan Desha. They are under these different states, the Karnataka and Maharashtra.
Right.
Maharashtra is a geopolitical state. So there are multiple deshas, but it has one official language which belongs to just one desha. The other desha has no representation. So the Tulu is unhappy, the Konkan is unhappy, Gorkhas are unhappy in Bangla. Telugu Nadu people were unhappy under Andhra. Now they separated. Right. So this displeasure is there primarily because the concept of nation state, one language, one region, one culture, therefore one political unit. That's fundamentally incompatible with the way India works. And this design problem exists today, which is one part of the conflict, disharmony. The other part of disharmony is how the monotheism is incentivized and the polytheism and the sampradaya multiplicity has been disincentivized. So all this put together, essentially, this is an union that breaks.
Let me probe you a little more. Why do you say that? Why is polytheism or sampradayas disincentivized?
Because the Indian state's notion of religion, understanding of what a religion means, is a Protestant notion. Religion, the term religion itself comes from there, then the term denomination comes from there. So the right to propagate, most importantly, comes from there. So exactly why should you be having a fundamental or even a right to propagate at all? There is a right to practice. Propagation should be subject to the merit and acceptability. It should not be an unconditional right given to anybody. It should be a very conditionally curtailed privilege that people earn through their conduct, through the merit of their ideas. Now, it is because certain cults don't have that merit of the idea, they have used state power to impose in the past, and that is well known. Why should that be allowed now? Why can't it be a land of freedom where people practice what they choose, and then the merit of the idea determines how long it will continue or it will not even continue? That should be the natural way of things, and that's how it has always been. Many traditions came in this country, many traditions disappeared also. Today we don't even know many traditions that existed in the past which served a very big purpose. So that's an organic system. When the system is organic, there is harmony. There is no real fight or acrimony because people are not insecure or threatened about the enforcement of any other idea.
But the Indian state, for instance, I would argue, or people would argue, that is not pushing any state. Yes, you've given right to propagate, but that means that that right exists everywhere. Everybody can propagate. Every sampradaya can propagate. The SGPC can go and say, no, Sikhism is great and here are the values of Sikhism.
Why should they have to say? Why can't they simply practice according to what they think is right?
Okay, and people get it.
Why should there be a race of propagation now that somebody is propagating, somebody else needs to propagate to protect his own identity? Why should all this be there in the first place?
Why should be allowed? Would that not be curtailing freedoms?
How?
I don't know. I want to go and convert.
Sure. So, as a free person, if you want to propagate your idea, talk to somebody else and try to convince him. Why should this have to come into the constitution as a right to propagate? There is absolutely no
I
need.
want to talk to somebody to convert, have a shastrarth, or just have a conversation that my path is a better path. Let that happen between society, but why put that in the constitution and give it state power?
It comes that way because it is a Protestant notion. Propagation is an obligation of that religion.
is an obligation of that religion, and so we've adopted the Protestant idea into the same notion into our idea.
Whereas practice is the general liberty anybody needs. Nobody needs liberty to propagate.
Yeah.
And whoever is knowledgeable enough, he will propagate and people will actually reach out to him.
Follow. That is how this country has always worked. A big guru comes and they talk about their thing and people follow. That is how all the modern gurus, for example, Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru Jaggi Basu, they also that's how people follow. They don't convert. They just talk about the values of their ideas and people join them. Yeah, okay.
So this privilege actually causes both disharmony and insecurity and conflict, which is another example. That way, the entire integration matrix of India, of the Deshakula Sampradaya, has been rendered a disintegration scheme. This whole thing becomes an integration theme if the state designs it properly, which is why our focus is on the state design.
Sure. Coming back to the Bharat of the future, in your points.
Justice, timely justice.
Yes.
Which again, it doesn't have to be a criticism of the system, how it works or anything. It's a given that we know the limitations and all that. It's also not about the individuals. Essentially, what exactly is the problem and how exactly can we go about it. The Indian state also understands the problem, but at the same time, the design is so deep. I don't really think that's fixable in the current scheme or the current architecture.
Okay, the judiciary, the delivery of the justice system is not fixable in the current architecture.
We can make fixes, we can improve things, but I don't think there is a very good solution unless the very state architecture changes. Because essentially there is no accountability of judiciary at the top.
To who? To the people or the legislature, to anybody actually. They are an independent arm of the state.
According to them, they are accountable to constitution, which is a written law. There is no entity that is holding it accountable. Therefore, there is no, in fact, that is also the reason it is the least transformed wing of the state.
Okay.
Because there is pressure on the legislative and there is pressure on the executive also through the public mandates, which doesn't happen with the judiciary. Now, it doesn't have to mean that judiciary should be elected and all that, but accountability needs to be enforced in one way or the other. How it comes is a different matter. So, which also naturally means that in a system where, in a country where justice is delivered timely, there is enough deterrent, there is also enough transformation. So, innocent are fearless, the offenders are fearful of the law. These are all basic tenets of any civilized society. These are also things that traditionally, if we see the questionnaire of the rishis to the kings, these are the basic questions everybody asks. Are the innocent fearless in your country? Are people able to pursue their goals of life?
Give an example when this was asked.
Every king, every rishi to every king, Narada to Dhritarashtra, Narada to let us say Dasharatha or Rama, Yudhishthira, everybody. All through. And this remains the basic questionnaire. Are innocent free and fearless in your country? Are they able to express their views without fear of retaliation? Are they pursuing their duties without any hindrances? Is the theft minimized? And all the basic things that anybody expects in a civilized society. So that is an outcome of a good system.
Yes. Okay.
So, and then to dream of what we really want for our country, we want it to be a place where there is no shortage of resources or avenues for fulfillment, and where human is measured by character and knowledge, not just by money and power, which again is not really a fault of the society at all. This is the society that even today respects the Shankara Pithas more than the politically powerful people. So the problem is not at all with the society. Problem is with the way Constitution has designed a material ladder right from the top and incentivized only money and power. And we want a Bharata where the public spaces are clean, sacred, beautiful, and worth craving to live in, where everybody comes and feels, he realizes and lives in a heaven.
I see a point here in which Dharmikas are primary citizens, but accommodate everyone else. Help us more. Are you saying only Hindus will be primary citizens, or Indian religionists only?
Not Indian religionists. In fact, the Dharma becomes a common theme, and the idea, if we don't even use that word technically, the similar exact definition of what it really means, the natural order, is a common feature of many traditions outside India also. Most of the East, in fact, which is not converted into Abrahamists. So these have to be, while there is no religion boundary in Bharata, but there has to be the acknowledgement of these are the ethos by which this country runs, which if not acknowledged, as it is the case today, there is zero incentive to protect those ethos.
That is correct.
Which is exactly why the sense of threat comes. Yes. The native cultures feel threatened. So that has to be explicitly coming into the goals of the system.
So give me an example of this ethos, please.
Pluralism, diversity, understanding that there could be multiple ways to live life. Very importantly, identity is being infaced.
Say that again. Say more.
Identity is being infaced. Basically, I mind my business. Rather than I have a judgment to make about how you are supposed to live. Having a bipartite view of the world, insider and outsider, and then having a judgment about how the outsider should be.
So the state would actually take a strong view of people or groups of people, individuals, anybody, taking a view that only my way is right and everybody else is wrong. Yes. The state would actively say.
State has to.
Has to. Okay.
Now that does it mean it will penalize? No. But the encouragement is towards the worldview that you embrace diversity naturally and harmony. The worldviews that are bipartite and involve natural conflict would have to be explicitly discouraged through their conduct.
How?
So if there is a space, now this has been again implemented in the past, so by our kings, where the conflict creators are dealt with through the executive reasonably strongly enough, which Shivaji had done, which even in the past, forget the Abrahamists, even with the native cults where they did excesses, kings had dealt with them very strongly. But none of that required any legislative action. It was simply executive action because that was a legal, they created a law and order problem or disrupted civil order in the society.
Okay.
But I mean, it looks common sense to say this, but unfortunately, this doesn't happen today. It doesn't happen even in the lands where Abrahamic religions are followed. Europe is unable to do with jihadi problem because of political correctness. Now they are probably waking up, but the essential principle by which this thing has been codified as a right to practice religion and all that is creating this problem. So the codification has to be towards the code rather than towards freedom of religion or propagation of religion. Which is why the right to propagate is a problem.
I'll say that, I'll repeat that. So you're saying the codification of the ethos that we're going to live by as opposed to codification of the right to propagate. That differentiation has to happen in a, I don't know, new constitution, new way of living of the state or whatever. Europe is facing this problem because it has prioritized propagation of religion as a freedom versus preserving and propagating the ethos by which they want to live. And anybody who challenges the ethos of diversity, of organic changes here to there or whatever, while a whole organized political system which tries and pushes a certain ideology and says everybody else is wrong, creates, for instance, Sharia zones, culls individual liberties, the state has to come down because the ethos will be challenged and not allow that to go on under the garb of or the prioritization of freedom of propagating religion. Very good, we could move. You said fair taxation.
Fair taxation.
And then wealth generation.
Where wealth generation is possible without fiscal and character corruption, which I think was the point you were making.
Yes.
Where state protects the wealth generator and the wealth generator in turn funds basic security. He also funds and invests in righteous activities. This has been traditionally happening. The Dharmika wealth generators.
So you're saying, sorry, I misread it. You're saying it protects the wealth generator, and the wealth generator in return funds security is actually a philanthropic wealth generator, or that is incentivized. That
Yes.
Can the state do that, or should the state do that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, state has measures to protect those people who do it, right?
Okay.
And incentives to those people. A Dharmika businessman should be a better friend of state than a characterless businessman by nature, right?
Okay. How would you do that?
Through state mechanisms. I mean, if the king decides
For
he can do
example,
100
the state
things.
currently has a 2% CSR. I mean, that's actually forcing the wealth generators to say, you better do some philanthropy.
Correct, but there are many people who do much more.
Yes.
What is CSR really helping? Now, CSR, you have to register organizations. Those registered organizations could themselves be evangelical.
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, it's a coercive state, and about 27,000 crores is largely going to Christian
And I don't know
child
who
care,
asked.
women empowerment, and all of this. And almost, if I remember my data correctly, 800 crores out of 27,000 crores is going into culture.
So that's exactly
terrible.
That's not really a dharmic work.
That's not dharmic work.
Dharmic work is what, let us say, who asked Tata to build the institutions, educational institutions, or the mandirs, the Birla Mandir that they do, or whatever philanthropy is done by Hindujas, for instance. This is not done by force of the state. This is done because they are naturally good. So this percentage business is useless. Basically, what is really helping the cause is what really needs to be encouraged, and the component of character can't be ignored in all these things.
And the state can't be coercive. They can't coerce people, businesses into saying that तुम्हारे को CSR करना है 2%. Who the hell is the state to dictate?
No, state. So that's the thing. I mean, if you are extracting tax, that's good enough. There should not be any. It's meaningless to say. So,
उसके ऊपर और 2% आप
because then you are admitting that whatever tax you are collecting is not spent on the society. So where all occupations are of dignity and divinity, and people have the freedom to pursue them based on ability and inclination.
This is where Varna comes in.
Not necessarily.
Also divinity.
That is everywhere. Again, it's a matrix. Your inclination can be determined based on your innate nature, the region, the upbringing, birth. There are so many factors.
Are you saying divinity when you say, do you mean a Vedantic worldview?
No, divinity, everything that we do essentially is a sacred right. If I am living a consecrated life, anything that I do is a divine activity. The whole creation is a sacred right, in fact. The cosmos is a sacred right, correct? Grand sacrifice. That's the view with which we live. If that's the view with which we live, we would not be littering on the streets, and we would not be doing our profession in a dishonest way. We would be honest. There would not be need for defining terms like professionalism. You would be living a charactered life. You will be doing your best naturally because you are seeing it as a sacred activity. Not really about
sacred in your own terms. For example, for someone, sacredness could be about animism or about ancestor worship or about Advait, Vedanta, anybody, and Vaishnavism, anybody to their own, and their own idea of divinity, which would then define character. Okay, so the state cannot have a position on what divinity means.
No, here the question is of occupation, right?
I get it, but I'm just probing on the word, what is divine, because that takes us into ideas of godliness, creationism, intelligent design. It can, unless you say that you take a view that it's, even if you don't have any ideas of God and all of that, you can say that this is just part of this humongous universe, and that there is awe there, there's mysticism there, and that also is a component of divinity. So I'm not sure if you could elaborate the term divinity here.
In this context, it is very clear. When people are doing it as a sacred duty, they are aligned to their conception of divinity anywhere. Each his own, to his own tradition, to his own region, whatever he subscribes to.
Okay.
And where each individual, group and tradition has the space and liberty to practice. Like we discussed, if they have relevance and merit, they will spread. We don't have to really incentivize it through a propagation right and all that. Where officers officiate.
Do you think if that was not in the constitution, Christians, church would behave differently?
No, but the entire system works in a different way that forces the intolerant to act in tolerant ways. The intolerant would be forced to act in tolerant ways if the entire system works in that way, right? If the incentive is towards being intolerant and it is okay to do that, the whole direction is towards intolerance and disharmony, which is exactly what happened now.
The state is, by putting right to propagate, it's incentivizing intolerance and actually saying it's okay
And
as
aggression.
long and aggression, because you're permitted under the constitution to do that. Very nuanced point here.
Where warriors are proud of protecting the land and the people as well as their ways of life. It's not just, okay, the warrior is great, he's doing a sacrifice to protect the borders, regardless of how the land is, how the people are. He may still be doing a great job, but how many would want to protect a corrupt people? Are they really proud of doing it?
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if they appreciate the divinity and the greatness of the land and the ways of the lives of the people, how would they act? The Banda is not just a military sacrifice that he did. It's for the way of the life he lived, and he died also.
Banda Bahadur. Yeah.
So similarly, so it would be a very different order of warrior we produce.
Yeah.
And that is the lineage of Rama, Yudhishthira, Arjuna. And where protection of geopolitical boundary is not just a underdog's achievement, but the assurance of a world power, where nobody actually prefers to touch your border. Obviously, it's a journey, we should get there, but that should be our dream explicitly stated, without which are we getting there?
Ayodhya. Right? That is what Ayodhya is, right? You cannot fight it, you cannot win against the state, you can't conquer it. And you say that Bharat is seen as a protector of Dharma worldwide.
It has to be an explicit branding where this state will protect these ways of life.
So if there is a Taliban in Afghanistan which has taken over, the Indian state will go to decimate an intolerant.
Okay, take one step back. You hear the amount of hesitation in the polity and supporters of the government when the Nupur Sharma episode happened, that we have to somehow maintain good relations with the Islamic countries, so we need to take certain measures. in that context, see this statement. They are saying we cannot protect because somebody else
thinks that
in a certain way.
Yeah, correct.
Which is exactly the reverse
But
that is supposed to
they're
happen.
actually saying we're not even protecting inside.
So, what we expect is the reverse. This nation stands for these values, and if somebody like Afghanistan or Bangladesh is persecuting people, they should be wary of it.
Yeah.
We have this neighbor, and we are not supposed to be taking this kind of liberty.
Yes, so they will not be allowed to take that. If by chance they are taken over, they take over, they must be fearful.
Exactly.
They must be fearful that Bharat will invade.
Because you would exercise power, not merely have power.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a military invasion at all, but still. But most of the times that fear acts. The point here is,
basically,
if you are seen as the protector,
they will not be able to take over because they'll be fearful.
Exactly. It shouldn't come to the pass where you take military measures.
But if it does come to a pass like that India will be an assertive power which will go out and assert its military power if should the need come to it. Absolutely. Okay.
So all this is possible only when we have a righteous state, where the ethos are, or the rules of the state are, to abide by the Dharma. Where the state is not infinite, it is finite, yet effective. Which is where again, so these are all just again statements of what takes us there. But to be able to do that, there may be a very long journey. That's a different thing.
Agreed. That's a different problem.
And when the state is aligned to the ethos of the civilization, which has to happen,
we will have to define this, right? The ethos of the civilization. Do some work in definition of this.
they are defined.
Okay.
Basically, the sample examples of values that we just said. And these are all textually known also. I don't think anybody is unaware of these. Question is whether these can be the guiding principles of the official system. Because the official system is stating its ideals to be something else.
So the same questions, are the innocent protected, are women protected, are they able to speak freely? Isn't there a need for documenting some of these and saying that these are the ethos of this civilization?
Yeah, they have to become the doctrine for state, right? Instead of the current doctrine, that has to become the doctrine.
Correct. Wonderful.
And when the state is invested in enabling individuals and groups, when state ideals involve not slogans of fraternity, right? I mean, the harmony has to be, promotion of harmony has to be part of the state program explicitly. This appeasement, incentivizing by vote banks, all these things.
Incentivizing factionalism. For example, we were having the discussion with the Manipur group who was saying, one gentleman just before our conversation was here, he was a army officer. He was saying, tribal community, and is retired. He was saying that, oh, we have a ministry of tribal affairs. Where is the ministry of non-tribal affairs? Why do we have this factionalism at all? Absolutely. That just creates disharmony, creates more chasms, widens the conflicts.
In fact, it achieves the reverse of what the state aims at, or the stated goal, because the idea is to protect the weak. And the least numerous groups will have least representation. When you may create a minority protection for people who are 10%, but what about people who are not even 10,000 in the entire country? They will not have a representative at all. Whereas this is a country with countless groups. So this whole group-based representation is an extremely meaningless and counterproductive method. It has to be that a man of character will naturally represent everybody. If that assumption is not there, you cannot have one prime minister at all. So anyway, and then the state can't be secular, but engages directly in dharmic rights of collective well-being. This fundamentally mitigates or litigates against many people's conscience, because they think the secular state is naturally tolerant and all that, which is not really the case. Traditionally, it is only the dharmic state that has been protective of everybody, whereas the secular state has been sowing seeds of conflict.
Yeah, as we just discussed.
Nobody actually complains today that either Shivaji or Vijayanagara or anybody persecuted any Muslims. They merely protected the ones who were being persecuted. Their ideals are very clear. Why are we confused today? And when state machinery recruits men based on character and capability, which are the prerequisites for doing things well and creating a good society.
When state on need basis funds education and temple and facilities, why should the state fund temple if it's only ethos which is protecting? By investing in temples, it actually says that it will be a Vaishnav or a Shaiv or a Islamic or whatever, right? I mean, if you consider temple.
So as on date, state gives money to these, right? The minority institutions do get money from the state.
That's correct.
Why not others? Number one.
So the state has to be plural. If minorities get it, the majority also must get it.
One part of the problem. The other part of the problem, is it merely about funding? Right? Contrary to not funding, there is actually control exercise over Hindu temples. They are extremely badly mismanaged by the state by appointment of all these things, right? The very sanctity is hurt in many places. If a secular institution runs a religious place, manages it, now there are a lot of excuses given. There are secular activities in the temple like collecting money. It's how is that a secular activity?
Sure. So if you leave that aside, that if you just get away from, suppose temples are free in the community, but the opposite, right? Why should state engage in enabling temples?
Okay, state will engage anyway because temple is a very big institution. There is no way something like state can stay out of something like as big as that. Whether it is law and order, whether it is managing the scale, state involvement is not going to be zero at all. And traditionally it was never zero. Temples were commissioned by kings, more importantly queens. And they used to oversee the constructions, they used to fund them and all these things. So that's not the problem. But that can only happen if the king is himself aligned to certain ethos. Today the problem is king is claiming that by rule of law he cannot be aligned to those ethos. Therefore he cannot be participating in it. But still he has to manage those.
Yeah, suppose take the management of it out, right? Yes. But the state, I mean, in that case, then the state will have to, if it's a plural state, which is an ideal ethos and a goal that you set for the state, then it will also have to fund masjids and churches.
And that's not stopped anywhere. And nobody stops it also, right? Today also the Indian state funds them. And even in the past, the Dharmic states did fund.
So
they gave
even if
monies to
all sort of sampradayas, all sort of what would be called religions.
They gave to Parsis, Jews, Muslims, everybody. That's not a problem at all. And that is not something that anybody is disputing or objecting to.
Okay.
Some education is slightly different because education traditionally is partly associated with temple, partly with Gurukulas, partly. There are many ways in which education is imparted. Now, can the state really decide the curriculum and things like that? What exactly does it mean by basic education? All this comes partly from the Protestant view, partly from the individualization, because of which state thinks of life skills as certain things. Needless to say, there is also a lot of baggage from the past, the age of post-feudalism, where the basic literacy was required, all these things. Today also Indian state says a lot of those things. So on that matter, definitely, what exactly education means, who needs education, and what are the methods to impart. I mean, do you train memory, then skills, all these things, or you just dump people with information?
And then test them if you've learned all of that or no. Okay. Recruits men based on character. State machinery recruits men based on character.
So as on date, capability is a criterion, identity is a criterion, but character is no criterion. Which is no good way to build up a good organization. So
And state is mandated to protect and encourage spread dharmic traditions worldwide. Wow. So you're saying
It has to be an evangelical
ethos
state
of the evangelical state.
which is actually funding it. I mean, many states did in the past. Even today, many states do.
That is how all of Southeast Asia was made Hindu and Buddhist, Shaiva and Vaishnav. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm saying even today, the Western state, which claims to be by enlightenment ideal, also does the exact same thing. It is even trying to create state machineries for other countries. So I don't think we should be shy about that at all. And when the divine and collective will prevail over all limbs of the state.
What does this mean?
Technically, the two components. The public will basically how the people express their opinion, and according to that, the state policy or the conduct of the head of the state can change. And divine will is a component that has been traditionally in many societies where king is seen as the representative of divine will. So whatever he does is fated. Whatever comes to his mind is fated at that time. Now that component they did try to reduce and change many forms, but still it's not disappeared, and it has not disappeared even in the West.
Okay, but we've progressively moved away from that. We know that, of course, in Nepal now there is an ask of bringing it back, but in Bhutan, for example, and also in Nepal, the king gave away and to democracy. Democracy has become a state ideal, for example, and we know it has not worked for Nepal. Nepal, there is a lot of thing to come get the monarch back. Because democracy, electoral democracy is not looking at character at all. It is just votes. Votes can be bought.
Populism.
Populism.
Not just that, now if divine will is not there in the picture, in the modern scheme, the entire state machinery is not exactly accountable to any will at all. Take Indian state for instance, legislative is accountable to an extent, executive is also, but not judiciary.
Why is the ethos, for example, that has to be protected not enough as divine will or whatever? Just the ethos, the civilizational ethos, documented in some sort of constitution.
Because it's not a word or a book that controls, right? It is some entity that you have to be accountable towards. Who is, I may claim to be accountable, but if somebody is not holding me accountable, it's useless. So claiming that I am accountable to constitution is as good as saying I am not accountable.
Okay, little hard, but yeah, maybe we'll elaborate at a certain different time. Let's go.
So, and when society is not scuttled but enabled by the state, because I mean this is a long struggle that the West has gone through, where society was deemed to be a hindrance for human liberty, and then they basically destroyed their society, where state directly deals with the individual, and the individual nevertheless still lost the freedom. So because eventually society or the groups that operate or the regions, any form of collectivity is an intermediary that offers enough protection as well as bargaining power to the individual. Nation's identity has to reflect the ethos that we have.
Yeah, we've already talked about this.
And the state assumes not a moralist or a reformist role. State has to, once it is accountable on those ethos, the head of the state and the men in position have to earn their position as well as credibility through their character. It's not just through manifesto delivery. It has to be that the man in position is valued for the character, then naturally yatha raja tadha praja, right? The entire society will want to conduct in a good way.
This is an important point, right? Whenever I've brought this up, having learned from you that the Indian society is about yatha raja tadha praja, people have said that, oh, it's corrupt people because of which we have corrupt netas, because netas come out of societies. You have a completely contrarian view to this.
It's the exact opposite. It is the corrupt neta that creates a corrupt society. British explicitly corrupted India by recruiting officers who are loyal to them and disloyal to the citizenry. Right? That mechanism continued in the post-colonial age. So we have a very clear, visible data for that. Once you get a charactered man at the top, you can see how people responded to Lal Bahadur Shastri's call to the nation. You can see how people responded to Modi's call.
Gas cylinders returning, for example. A crore of them were returned voluntarily.
Voluntarily, Notbandi, anything. This is a great citizenry that we have. You will not find a better society in the world. What we lack is a good state. So that's about it essentially. The details yet to develop, but this is where we stand.
So we need a vision for a Bharata, and this is a how is it going to be possible? Hope you enjoyed this conversation. I mean, there's more work. This is not by any stretch of imagination a documentation of what full documentation of what needs to be. All of these are starting points, vision points, and a brief set of points on how we are going to achieve it, and when is it possible. But very, very useful thoughts to reflect upon, and why the current state is a dysfunctional state at almost every level, every limb of the state: judiciary, legislature, executive, and how it is, like we discussed, incentivizing negative karma for its citizens. So this is a simple paper of how we need to move away to a new state, and this is Shankara's work. More power to him. You can look him up. You can look up our talks, our other conversations, and find him to delve more. Leave your comments, and maybe he can pick those ideas up to make it part of his work going forward. Thank you very much.